Okay, so we are here at Woodstock Soapstone Company, and today we'd like to show you how to replace the perimeter gasket around the air duct cover of a Fireview. Tools you're going to need are a shop vac, probably going to need a rigid putty knife, maybe even a small flat blade screwdriver, possibly a hammer to chip out some of the older furnace cement, and replacement gasket and furnace cement to seal it in place. So first thing you're going to do is take the lid off of your Fireview, just lift it up, set it down on a workbench or away from the stove. It's heavy, so be careful taking it off. You want to start by just finding a loose end of the old gasket. Pull out as much of the gasket as you can. Once the gasket is removed, you'll notice that there's some furnace cement that it's bedded in around the perimeter. And we're going to need to remove that furnace cement as much as possible so that we have room to get a new bead of cement in there just to bed the gasket down into. You're not going to seal this gap with the furnace cement. Eventually it will crack out of there. But you want to just give the gasket something that it will adhere to around the perimeter of the stove. So we're going to start cleaning that out, and then we'll get to installing the gasket. Okay, so your gasket kit will come roughly cut to length, but it's always a good idea to do a dry fit to get the exact length of the gasket you're going to need. So after you get the gasket channel cleaned out, just go around, gently tuck the gasket in just to get an idea of the overall length that you're going to need. We're going to trim off the excess once we figure exactly what we're going to need. Usually we send you plenty to go around there with a little bit of extra. So you want to leave a little bit of an overlap there so we can tuck the ends together. So remove the gasket. The furnace cement that we supply is often very stiff in the tube. It's always a good idea to give it a soak in some hot water for 15 to 20 minutes before you use it. That'll help soften it up. If it's in a regular caulking gun, you'd have to cut the tip of the tube off and then cut the screw-on tip to roughly a 1/4 inch bead, maybe a little bit less. So as we get the furnace cement into the open groove, we're going to start at the front corner. You can start wherever you like, but I'm going to start here and work my way around to the back of the stove and then back to the front. Now this front edge is directly above the air wash in the stove. The instructions say do not put any of the furnace cement here. If you choose to put furnace cement along the front edge, just be aware that if any of it falls through, it will obstruct the air going into the firebox and very likely lead to dark streaks, sooty streaks on the glass. So you want to be very careful if you decide to put the furnace cement there, that nothing falls through. If you choose not to put the furnace cement here, you usually have a wide enough gap to use a putty knife to tuck the gasket right down there, and it will stay in place. So we're going to start right at the front corner here. Remember, we're not filling the gap with the furnace cement. We're just putting enough in there so that we can bed that gasket down into it, give it some place to grab onto. So we're going to work our way all the way around the back of the stove to the front. Again, bring it right back, and again, you don't want it to fall through. All right, furnace cement installed. Doesn't matter really where you start with the gasket, but what we want to do is press it right down into the furnace cement. Now if you come across an area that's kind of narrow, you can pull on the gasket to stretch it out. If you come on a little bit wider area, you can push the gasket back onto itself to fill that gap. So if you push it back onto itself, it stays nice and fluffy, and when you stretch it out, it'll thin out a bit. You just want to work it right down into that furnace cement. This is a little bit tighter area, so I'm going to stretch it out a little bit. Make sure it gets right down into the cement to hold it. We're going to work our way across the front. Now I chose not to put the furnace cement across the front, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to push it right down into the gap, just to get it to hold itself in there while we work our way around the stove. I'm going to come back and tuck all of that in with a putty knife. See, by stretching it out in some areas, I got a little bit of excess even after I pre-measured. So again, we're going to nip this off, give it a little extra length so that we can put these ends together here to get a good seal. Ends look good there. So, putty knife. And we don't want to poke it all the way through, we just want to make sure it's firmly in place. Make sure those ends stay together. This area was a little bit tighter, so you want to make sure you've got that right down into that furnace cement. Furnace cement coming out there, that's a good sign. Remember, we're not poking it all the way through. Now this gasket is important because it separates the actively burning part of the firebox from the exhaust area. If this area was open, we'd have gases and smoke coming up out of the firebox and bypassing the catalytic combustor. We want to send all of that material through the catalytic combustor. So I'm just tucking this front edge right down into that groove, make sure it stays there on its own. And we're right back to where we started. Just make sure this front edge got in there well. So the air duct cover gasket is now back in place. As far as the furnace cement goes, curing time, if you were to do a relatively low temperature fire, 250, that'll help dry out the furnace cement underneath that gasket.